Hello, and welcome to Group 8 Summative Science Fiction presentation, presented by Josh King. In this presentation, by using both the 1954 and 2014 Godzilla films as case studies, we will attempt to discuss and explore the representation of environmental destruction and eco-disaster within the science fiction genre, utilizing the academic discourse surrounding these films and the themes within them. The main research question we will try to answer is, how has Godzilla been used to reflect humanity's fear of environmental destruction? Science fiction films and the destruction of real-world environments within them usually reflect on contemporary society's anxieties and cultural fears. The original Godzilla film reflected on post-war Japan's justified fear of nuclear technology, the damage it had already dealt and the damage it could potentially deal. As both the original and 2014 versions present Godzilla as the harbinger of man-made apocalypse to punish the sins of mankind, how does the 2014 revamp reflect on societal fears of environmentalism differently, and also why? We will first look at the 1954 Godzilla, delving into the environmental destruction as nuclear caution within the film. We will then compare the 2014 version to the original and see how representation of the themes at hand have changed and evolved. Godzilla is the first film in the Godzilla franchise. It tells the story of a country besieged throughout by a giant monster, or kaiju, a threat exacerbated through radioactive means. The creature is only ultimately defeated through the invention and sacrifice of a reluctant scientist, following many deaths. It was a beginning point for the kaiju's subgenre of films, so much so that it was later redubbed and remade into the American Godzilla King of Monsters, a film which drastically changes the original's tone, as well as adding an American protagonist. The character has also gone on to have a lasting legacy, albeit one of mostly divorced from Honda's original thematic messaging and intent. Godzilla is a metaphor for atomic destruction rather than direct allegory for the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bombings themselves are frequently mentioned as occurrences within the film's universe, including one character who notes having narrowly escaped Nagasaki. The creature Godzilla is also an established part of the film's universe, being a piece of mythology later revealed to be true. This atmosphere of dealing with a relatively recent trauma head-on is compounded through multiple instances of grief displayed by the families of those left behind, by both Godzilla and the war. One notable instance has a mother tell her young child that they'll be with their father soon, following the approach of Godzilla into the city, likely meaning that the father had been killed in World War II. Essentially, the film is a rather outlandish representation of what the consequences of nuclear weaponry and the testing of which could be. Even radiation poisoning is given a nod following Godzilla's attack on the city. The film is not interested in being subtle in its messaging. Rather than a representation or one-to-one allegory, the creature is a result of atomic destruction. While Godzilla is not created by the atom bombs, its destructive capabilities are, as are the circumstances that lead to Godzilla's rising in the first place. The film makes many direct mentions of the atomic bombs throughout, which makes it pretty clear as to what the film is trying to say. Also made clear is the different kinds of nuclear disaster mentioned, including the atomic tuna, which was an international incident involving a radiated fishing boat, which was caused due to the testing of nuclear weaponry by the US. The SS Lucky Dragon 5 was a fishing boat that became contaminated with radiation following the United States testing of a nuclear bomb at Bikini Atoll. The original test was intended to be in an 80-mile radius, but this ultimately went wrong, leading to the accident. This occurred in 1954 and led to one death and several shortened lives among the crew. In fact, the film Godzilla was inspired by this incident in other ways as well. The film opens with a fishing boat after all. One thing that Godzilla does have is an Oppenheimer-like figure in Dr. Serizawa, a scientist whose invention, the oxygen destroyer, is both what ultimately kills the threat and is also an extreme weight on the character's conscience. Unlike Oppenheimer, Serizawa flatly refuses to use the weapon for anything at all, and it takes him both destroying his research and sacrificing his own life in the effort for him to be okay with using it. And even that only under great duress. While the oxygen destroyer ultimately kills Godzilla, Serizawa himself considers it a mistake to be corrected. Even Godzilla, the creature who destroys so much throughout the runtime of the film, is treated with some measure of sympathy by the narrative. The father of the main protagonist's love interest is a zoologist. He is the one that figures out that by Godzilla's habitat was being destroyed by the bombings, and that said bombings happened to make the creature radioactive as well. Ultimately, Godzilla is just an animal, one that has been displaced and been altered by events far beyond its control. Godzilla may be the antagonist of the film, who destroys many places and kills many people. What it's not is evil. Though this perspective is not wholly shared by all the characters, it is the one film that seems to find is the one that the film finds the most compelling. The zoologist is the main character who gets the final word, in the end, warning the audience of the consequences of further nuclear testing. The wariness of which the film treats nuclear armament and testing is made explicit by the ending, which has a character state to the camera that more testing of H-bombs will lead to more Godzillas and disasters leading to the loss of life. This can easily be read as both the ultimate message of the film, as the film has a very negative view of anything nuclear, and a sequel hook. Ultimately, it is a very Japanese perspective on the matter of nuclear armament, and the fallout of which, especially considering at the time of relatively recency, it was a trauma that needed to be discussed. Godzilla is a destructive force resulting from humanity's hubris. Caused by destruction of our natural environment, it comes as a form of revenge from the planet in our cities and other man-made icons. The monster forms a reckoning for a reckless race that has finally towed the line of its allowed excess. Exorbitant environmental disregard, and most notably the use and fear of nuclear technology, forms the forefront of Godzilla's environmental destruction narrative. Audiences are drawn by that which Fludfelder writes on, taking pleasure in effect at the spectacle of catastrophic destruction for the price of the movie ticket, whilst then being shown the underlying warnings of potential dangers. Jeff King writes that Godzilla is just one of many agents of destruction to have made a beeline for the metropolis. The devastation that results offers much in the way of cinematic spectacle. It can also be read as a redemptive assault on manifestations of decadence. King's point bolsters the idea that Godzilla comes as a result of human activity, our own destruction of the environment in which we live finally catching up to us. The warnings given within the film come after the massively increased usage of nuclear technology, of which will be mainly explored in the next section. However, a brief overview allows for improved exploration of environmental destruction. Yamata Inuhiku comments on one of the events which gave a lasting impact of the nuclear energy. In light of this, it is significant that in March 1954, the US tested a 15 megaton hydrogen bomb in the South Pacific, which exposed numerous Japanese fishermen to lethal doses of radiation in the process. The news of this incident shocked the whole nation, for after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this was the third time that the Japanese citizens had been killed and maimed from nuclear exposure. The damaging effects of nuclear technology being significant in a discussion of Godzilla, as they are the cause of the monster's awakening and subsequent destructive rampage. Inuhiku goes on to strengthen this connection. Despite the powerful wartime memories symbolically recalled through such scenes, the most commonly evoked reading of the concept of Godzilla remains the most powerful appropriateness as a metaphor for the nuclear bomb. This rampage forms the environmental destruction directly witnessed by audiences on screen. The as explored warning against nuclear usage. Godzilla's rampage takes place in an immediately recognizable environment, New York City. The assault on New York City forms one of the most memorable science fiction film scenes in history, a looming beast wreaking havoc on the skyscrapers known worldwide as the pinnacle of American achievement, allowing audiences to see true environmental destruction. Environmental destruction very close to home. As Jeff King notes, to reinforce this point, a West Coast destination such as Los Angeles or San Francisco might have offered a marginally more plausible proximity, but not quite the instantly familiar iconography of Manhattan skyline and the compression of landmarks are ripe for destruction. In her book, The Imagination of Disaster, Susan Sontag describes a typical science fiction narrative beginning with the emergence of a greatly destructive threat. The threat, which is often a monster, wreaks havoc on a well-known landmark, after which the central characters from the film confer and often utilize science or unstable means to repel the danger as it tears down more of the city in which it attacks. This narrative was one of a disaster film that shows environmental destruction, a film such as Godzilla, therefore, highlighting its typicality within the science fiction genre. This genre often utilizes environmental destruction, the theme drawing audiences in to sate a macabre desire to enjoy the destruction of environments that they know well. This destructive draw being used to convey to as many as possible the underlying messages within the films. In the case of Godzilla, a warning against unchecked nuclear technology, of which we shall explore next. As mentioned before, Godzilla is a warning to a nation which has been riddled with the anxiety of nuclear destruction. This has been a constant fear within Japan since the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and more recent to the film, the testings done by the United States within the Pacific Ocean. To Japan, Godzilla was a direct public sentiment of concern regarding the testing of nuclear weapons in the Pacific Ocean. The event that led to the film Godzilla were the result of a H-bomb testing, which had gone wrong, causing the destruction of the Japanese fishing ship SS Lucky Dragon 5 by the radiation of this nuclear weapon. Therefore, the film opens with a fishing boat that gets destroyed by the atomic bomb, leading to the death of many of the crew and the awakening of the prehistoric monster as a warning of the consequences of nuclear weapons. Godzilla himself represents, as Lowe puts it, the punishing of humans for violating nature. He is the force that they must defeat but have no idea how to. We never actually see the full destruction committed, only pieces of it. While Godzilla is walking past pillaging these towns, his aim is Tokyo, which at the time was the fear that many nations had, which was the losing their country's capital, and therefore their infrastructure and government. This fear is magnified within the film once Godzilla reaches Tokyo and lays waste to the capital. This is what makes the film a cautionary tale to the Japanese public, as it is a warning of the destruction which nuclear weapons will leave behind, and how picking up the pieces for the public will be a hopeless effort. The use of Godzilla as the metaphor for nuclear energy and weapons shows the heightened risk that the Japanese at the time believed would be the destruction of Japan. By creating a 50-meter tall monster, the Japanese were trying to depict how public sentiment towards nuclear weapons and how much damage they could cause had previously caused too. One interesting aspect to note is that although Godzilla is the kaiju that weighs least to the nation, he is never truly blamed for the destruction. The reasoning for this is explained in the movie by many scientists such as paleontologist Dr. Koyuki Hamane, who explains that Godzilla was created by the nuclear weapons testing and that humans were the ones to destroy its habitat. Although a living bacterium, he was, as explained in the film, forced to evolve via the atomic bombs into the giant 50-meter monster that we know of today. This reasoning leads to seeing Godzilla as a product of man-made mistakes and therefore allows the audience to view Godzilla as the victim. For Godzilla being seen as a victim or sometimes even an innocent animal allows him to later be seen as a hero within the coming sequels. As Wirt puts it, the prototypical nuclear monster, the Japanese Godzilla, had this dual character. As well as a raging menace, he was a tragic victim of the hydrogen bomb test that drove him from the ocean depths. In the end, he perished pitifully. In later revivals, he even became the hero, battling rival monsters. Continuing from this is later amplified in the 2014 Hollywood remake, when Godzilla eventually becomes the hero of the film, albeit for completely different reasons compared to the original. Nuclear representation has shifted to a better view to make nuclear power seem like it is a good thing, which helps Godzilla become a hero. The tone of the film now focuses more on the damage that climate change has done to the planet rather than show how nuclear weapons have damaged and fueled climate, leading to a normalization of nuclear weapons within the film. Godzilla is their savior rather than the reason for him being around because of nuclear weapons. To many people, Godzilla is later seen as a hero, viewing the kaiju as a light-hearted character that saves Japan, and see the franchise as a standard movie monster. In recent years, climate change has become a major issue within modern society. Due to our reckless use of fossil fuels, the people of the Earth have ruined the planet we all call home. As we are well aware, science fiction tends to ground itself in the real, and as a result of this, environmentalist science fiction has tended to focus on this topic in recent years, leading to a family of films that have become known as cli-fi, climate fiction films. Scholar Buffin explains that the rise in popularity of the cli-fi can be seen as a kind of social cultural unconsciousness responding to the cultural trauma of the not fully admitted but unavoidable knowledge of impending climate change and the other ecological deterioration. This social fear lends itself well to the science fiction disaster film, as is seen in the 2014 Godzilla film. Gareth Edwards' 2014 adaptation of Godzilla somewhat changes the outlook of the titular monster. No longer is the Titan solely a metaphor for the atomic destruction. This Hollywood blockbuster version of Godzilla now also presents the environmental destruction of our planet that gets increasingly worse each year. The film uses multiple different avenues to portray this message to the viewers. Edwards' use of the character of Godzilla as a means to explore this unavoidable knowledge is very interesting and can be seen to add a more modern outlook and subsequently present more modern fears to his audience. To start, the film opens with a title sequence with past footage of the military using atomic weapons to attack, harm, and ultimately kill Godzilla. There is a constant blur between the image of the natural, the military, and the atomic. This opening sequence, while short, allows for a major injection of information to the audience. As an audience, we are aware that the humanity is not only against the creature of Godzilla and will use anything in our power to destroy him, but also that our need to destroy him not only harms him, but the radiation we've used has harmed the planet around us. Moving forward, the opening of the film, before we meet the King of Monsters, is flooded with imagery of juxtaposing visuals of the natural world and humanity's built-up society. Whilst nothing is stated about this within the narrative, it could be read as further commentary about our destruction of the beauty of the natural world. Humanity's need to grow, expand, and succeed is harming the beauty of our planet, which harmonizes well with the overall theme of the film. Interestingly, the destruction caused by Godzilla in the film mirrors that of natural destruction. His destruction mimics that of earthquakes and tsunamis. His attacks are not an active destruction of humanity. He does not actively break buildings himself. Instead of his intrusive link to nature results in the destruction of societies. These visuals further the depiction of Godzilla as a protector of the natural world. The film bends the expectation of his destruction to further the message of the importance of the natural world that we must protect. Finally, within the film, a battle takes place between Godzilla and two Mutos, who threaten the world as we know it. The final battle can be seen to represent nature fighting back against the destruction of the planet. Murray and Human state that the monster fights the monster rather than the humans to restore nature's balance. The scene gives the natural world a voice, and as Greenberg states, Godzilla does not represent a large house pet willing to surrender his life to protect his master. Instead, he is fighting the Mutos to protect his home. He is a conservative protector of the status quo. This idea of Godzilla as a protector of the natural drastically juxtaposes the character's original meaning. No longer is he presented as a consequence of destruction, he now is a figure that actively fights against it, putting himself at risk to save his home. What I find most interesting is humanity's acceptance of the creature at the end of the film. Once Godzilla saves humanity, he is crowned King of the Monsters. This newfound acceptance once more highlights humanity's selfish and unchanging ways when it comes to the natural world. Whilst in the past, great effort was taken to destroy the titular creatures with atomic bombs, it is only now he has saved humanity from a bigger threat that he has finally granted respect from his fellow co-inhabitants, as they believe that he deliberately saved them as opposed to saving himself. The 2014 Godzilla is a departure from the original themes of the Godzilla stories, but as Rothman claims, nature doesn't just bite back, it stomps and smashes too. Gareth Edwards' take on the iconic monster allows for more modern fears and anxieties that come to life on the screen. No longer are we afraid of nuclear destruction, we now live in fear of our ever changing climate, and in the real world, we have no monster to save us. In this presentation, we have attempted to explore both the 1954 and 2014 Godzilla films and how they reflect upon contemporary anxieties relevant to the time they were made in. In 1954 Japan, that anxiety was one of devastation that nuclear weaponry had and could have. In 2014, that anxiety was of climate change and environmentalism, both being alternate versions of man-made end-of-the-world scenarios. Through our exploration of these films, we have attempted to answer and delve into the question, how has Godzilla been used to reflect humanity's fear of environmentalism and destruction? The original Godzilla treats nuclear armament, development and testing as something to be wary and fearful of, out of worry for a further loss of life as something recently experienced by Japan. Godzilla's environmental destruction narrative is formed by the use of these nuclear technologies and exorbitant presentation, or eco-disaster. But by 2014, whilst Godzilla has often been praised by critics and fans as reflecting public concerns about environmental disaster, the environmental messages that Godzilla conveys are often so encumbered with competing narratives and also by the need for fantastic spectacle that the eco message is confused or diminished. A reflection of fear of environmental destruction remains, but is hidden behind Hollywood's need for box office success. The 2014 Godzilla, instead of staying static and representing fear of nuclear technology, broadens the monster film genre and becomes a sci-fi monster film, reflecting on fears of the changing climate. Science fiction has been used to reflect humanity's fear of environmental destruction through narratives exploring ecological destruction and scenarios concerning the end of humanity. Specifically though, and briefly answering the research question, Godzilla has been used to reflect humanity's fear of environmental destruction because of humanity's past of violating, abusing, and taking advantage of the said natural environment. Godzilla brings retribution for destroying and hurting Mother Earth, and as such fights back the same way that we hurt her, through nuclear means. Godzilla is seen as a metaphor for atomic destruction rather than an allegory, due to being a result of atomic destruction itself, and, in turn, reflects humanity's fear of environmental destruction through being represented as the monster that could end the world, whether this be through atomic power, the ability to cause natural disasters, or pure destructive powers. However, it can also represent the opposite, in that if used wisely and treated with respect, this atomic power can be used to protect and save humanity rather than destroy it. Thank you very much for listening.